Hello and welcome to the Wayne County Staff Picks. Today we have a lot of great staff picks for you, and so we're going to get started.
My name is Naomi. I'm a children's librarian, and I'm talking about Pocketful of Colors, about Mary Blair. It was written by Amy Guillermo, Jacqueline Torville, and it was illustrated by Bridget Barriger. And it is about Mary Blair. Most people are probably not familiar with her, but you've probably seen her art before. She worked at the Disney Studios a lot in the 1940s and 50s, and she was instrumental in the color design of many of the classic movies. And she also designed the It's a Small World ride, so apologies if you have that song stuck in your head right now. She wasn't tied to the studio. She also spent time illustrating children's books and doing a lot of other cool stuff artistically. So, this book draws on her expressive and bold use of color. There's an end note that says an artist who worked with her noted that she never really mixed colors. She just full-on wanted to give you a pop of color. So they use the color names all throughout the text. So you don't just talk about blue, you talk about cornflower. You don't talk about black, she talks about charcoal. So it's really gorgeous, and my favorite spread takes place when she is in South America. Walt Disney took a group of artists to South America in the 1940s, and her art was so cool that he decided to give her more responsibilities once they got back to the States. So there's a really gorgeous explosion of rainbow colors all over this one page that is awesome. So we have other picture book biographies, not just about Mary Blair. We have ones about people that you may know, like John Deere or Ada Lovelace, Dr. Seuss. It's a kind of growing market right now in children's book publishing, so stay tuned for more of those.
So, Naomi, did Mary Oliver, was she behind any particular movies that Disney did?
Mary Blair did concept art for a lot of the ones in the 50s, like Peter Pan, Cinderella, anything with kind of odd colors like green mermaids or teal pumpkins has her fingerprints all over it.
Not the Black Cauldron.
Not the Black Cauldron.
Hello, hi, I'm Miriam, and today I'm going to talk about The Martian by Andy Weir. And this book takes place in the year 2035 when 6 NASA astronauts from the U.S. are on a Mars mission, but their mission gets scrapped only after 6 days. And they're on their way back to the map, which is going to take them up to the space shuttle, the Hermes, when the communications antenna breaks loose and hits one of the astronauts, Mark Watney, and his entire crew thinks that he's dead, so they leave him. However, Mark Watney is not dead. So Mark has to improvise his entire life right there and then, and he has to save himself because he's injured, and then he has to figure out how he's going to survive all by himself alone on Mars, and he has no way of getting in contact with NASA. So he decides to start growing potatoes, which luckily NASA has sent up there because the crew was supposed to be there over Thanksgiving, and he starts rationing and figuring out, how he's going to get in contact with NASA. Unfortunately, NASA's already had a funeral for him, but they realized after a month their mistake that Mark is actually alive. So they're scrambling about how to get supplies to him, which would take about a year, and the next Mars mission isn't until in the next 4 years. So the story is about the human race coming together to bring home one person from Mars, and it's about fixing one problem after the next, and Mark has to fix one problem after the next because it's just one thing after the next. So this book is great. It's really funny. The science is not hard to understand. It's actually, really easy to understand, and it's just really suspenseful and adventurous, and I think you'll really, really like it.
Did you see the movie?
Oh yes, I loved the movie. It was so good. Normally, I'm very picky about the movie, book to movie adaptations, but this one was really good. Of course, they left stuff out, but they did a really great job with the things that that happened to Mark, and they did a great job of portraying it. And they actually used a lot of people from NASA, like Ridley Scott, the director. She used a lot of people from NASA to, or at least one person, to make sure everything was as accurate as possible. So I think the guy who helped her, he definitely said that the movie looked like it would be an actual mission to Mars. So, but I thought it was fantastic. I loved it.
Hi, my name is Nick Starr. I'm a children's librarian at the library, and today I'm going to talk about Neil Gaiman's book of Norse mythology that he wrote. It's a collection of some of the stories from Norse mythology that he collected over about 8 years, that he went back and revisited, and his publishers finally harassed him into actually publishing the book. He provides a really good introduction about explaining how he fell in love with the Norse mythology stories from reading the Marvel comics as a kid and reading about Thor, who is nothing like the ginger, bearded, farting, belching, not the brightest person in Norse mythology, and kind of goes and brings those stories to life, and he tells it in his own voice, so it's not really a dry telling, it's very much in Neil Gaiman's voice. So he's also written American Gods, Coraline, Good Omens, The Graveyard Book, and a number of other stories. So it's very much told in his tone of voice. So they're really funny for what some of the stories are, and some of them are actually pretty sad, more so than the other versions I've ever read. But he also kind of introduces at the beginning, kind of very vaguely, the different lands like Ginnungagap and Yggdrasil, and mostly focuses on Odin, Loki, and Thor as the three main kind of most important characters in Norse mythology. So the stories that he picks to retell in this collection are mostly about them. And I was fortunate enough to go see Neil Gaiman live a couple weeks ago, and he was reading a couple of stories from this. So I went back onto Hoopla and was listening to the audio version that he reads of it. And he does a really good job of reading these stories too. So if you are able to go through Overdrive or Hoopla, I would also recommend actually going and listening to him read, because he does a phenomenal job of reading these stories.
I don't know anything about mythology other than like the Thor movies.
It's nothing like Thor movies. Neil Gaiman did say that he always tests sticks now, because in the Marvel comic, like the first Marvel comic, the guy, some weird doctor, is wandering around and gets stuck in a cave. So in the comic, he picks up like a stick for some reason and like bangs it against the cave, and it turns into Mjolnir, and he magically turns into Thor. So like Donald, I think that's his name. And like ever since he was a kid and he read that, he always picks up sticks and like taps them on something to see if he's
Just to see.
just how, just to see if maybe he turns into Thor.
You know, I would be interested in how the writers of those comics first latched on to Norse mythology, because Greek and Roman mythology were pretty commonly a part of school curriculum, but not necessarily Norse mythology.
And we have more connections. Thor in the comics isn't like Asgard Thor, like Mrs. Thor.
Isn't that Chris Hemsworth?
No, like he has ginger hair and he farts and burps and he's dumb.
That's okay. I have ginger hair, but none.
So there's two gingers here.
Like he's not beautiful, long, golden locks,
So how is the Marvel movies, how are they different from actual Norse mythology? Just briefly.
They're mostly different. I mean, they get like the basic points, like Thor does have Mjolnir, the hammer, Odin loses an eye. Loki, like the relationship, which is kind of like in all mythology, is kind of wishy-washy. Like there's like no very clear, like this person is obviously this relation to that. Like Neil Gaiman kind of has Loki being almost more of a sibling to Odin, rather than in like the Marvel comics, Thor and Loki are brothers or adopted brothers. But they kind of hit like the main points, and they at least use a lot of the terms the right way. So for as vague as mythology can be, they do a decent job. But Thor isn't like Norse mythology Thor. He's not the long, beautiful hair, and isn't really what Thor is ever depicted in the books. Or in Norse mythology, he's always fairly dumb and just likes running around and hitting things. Like he's very like macho man who doesn't think about things, and when he gets his hammer, he likes banging stuff and throwing it, which isn't really how he's portrayed in the comics. They try to make him a little more regal.
Hi, I'm Diana Rice. I'm a children's librarian here. And I'm going to tell you about Undefeated, Jim Thorpe and the Carlisle Indian School Football Team by Steve Schenken. It's a book that was written with young people in mind, upper elementary aged to adult. I loved the book. And if you think you know about Jim Thorpe or Pop Warner, you'll be interested in this book. And definitely, if you're interested in football and history, you'll enjoy this book. It takes place primarily in the 20 years before and after the year 1900, in the early days of football and in the early days of our country when there were Indian boarding schools. At that time, when football was new, it was a very violent game. Imagine that. But more violent even than we think of football today. In fact, slugging was allowed. It's a big part of the game. You didn't stop a play until a player was not moving anymore. And you can stop him from moving in any way, including punching him. The Carlisle Indian School students, they wanted a football team. They wanted to compete with other schools, but their director, Captain Pratt, didn't want them hurt. Football was so violent in 1905, for instance, that one season, 19 football players died. Eventually, Captain Pratt came around and he decided it would be good publicity for his school if he had a football team and he could take those people out on the road. They had to go out on the road because they didn't really have a field. And he agreed when the students came and asked him if we could have a football team. He said yes, but there were two requirements. One, you could not slug the other team, even though that was a big part of the game at the time. You could not physically interact by punching any player of the opposite team. And the second thing was, within 2 to 4 years, they had to beat the big four teams at the time. They were mostly East Coast, Princeton, Yale, and Harvard. This was in the early 1900s. And this little Indian school football team, he told them, sure, you can have a football team, you just have to beat the big ones. So they decided that they would give it a shot. Jim Thorpe doesn't show up in this book and at the Carlisle Indian School until a few years later, about 8 years later, when he's 15 years old. He knows all about Indian boarding schools. He's been in a couple of them. And he knows all about the football team because in just 8 years, they have beaten at least one of the big four and really made a name for themselves in intercollegiate football teams and scores and playing. He comes roaring in to Carlisle Indian School. Not really. The first time he does something athletic, he's walking off the field, farming field, in his overalls, and he sees some people jumping over this thing. He says, what are you doing? They said, it's a high jump, but we've got it up to this height and nobody can jump over it. He says, I'll give it a try. In his overalls and his farm boots, walking right off the farm field, he leaps right over the bar that was set for the high jump. That starts his career in track, and a couple years later, he decides he wants to play on the football team. He's almost 6 foot tall, and he weighs a whopping 140 pounds. And Coach Pop Warner says, you can't play football, you're my track star. And he says, just watch me. If anybody else on the team can take me down and hurt me, I won't play. Twice, Pop Warner lines up everybody else on the team and tries to get them to catch Jim Thorpe as he's carrying the football, running down this muddy football field they have. Nobody else can catch him, and he's on the team. And I'm going to stop telling you about this book because it is so exciting, and there are so many great stories in here about individual football games. Like the time in 1911 when 40,000 people showed up, more than the crowd at the World Series, to watch Harvard play the Carlisle Indian School football team. 50 Harvard players suited up to Carlisle's 16. Guess who won the game? Not going to tell you. You'll love this book.
We have kind of a movie theme going on with all of our books here. Has there been a movie about Jim Thorpe?
There actually is an old movie called Jim Thorpe All-American. I think Burt Lancaster played Jim Thorpe at that time, so.
What other sports did Jim Thorpe do?
Jim Thorpe is also well known for winning 2 gold medals in the 1912 Olympics in the pentathlon and the decathlon, really easy events. He also went on to play professional baseball and professional football. In fact, he was the first president of what became the National Football League.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
Is he in the Hall of Fame?
I'm pretty sure he's represented
Somewhere.
in Canton. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks so much for watching the Staff Picks program for today. We hope you enjoy some of these picks. Make sure you take a look at our branch and main libraries and check these books out. They're also available on Hoopla and Overdrive. Thanks again.